Firstly, I want to kick off by saying a massive thank you to all of you out there that have stumbled across this build series and subscribed to the channel. The first 3 videos, the numbers that they have done, obviously they're small in the grand scheme of YouTube, but for my little channel, it has completely taken me by surprise. And it's an awesome feeling knowing that there's so much interest out there that you guys are showing in my next build. For those of you that are new, and this is the first video you've come across, in the last episode, I gave a real deep dive on the details of the body package that I have bought and how that is going to work around the donor car, which is a Mercedes SLK AMG 32. So quite a rare car to start with, and something that has proved to be quite contentious why I have chopped up that car, and I will touch on that. But like I say, thank you. Please continue to support the channel. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, then do so. Share the videos, comment below, and yeah, let's just get through this one together because this is going to be a very special build. Let's just dive into this one feet first. Getting the body sat over the chassis is an absolute 2-person job. There is no way I could have done it by myself. So I roped in one of my neighbours, and then with just the attitude of, well, let's just give it a try. This is the first time. Let's see how far we get. We started to manoeuvre the body over the chassis. People that have done this before me gave me some really good pointers of how much to cut down this chassis. I found that with very little struggle, we managed to get this body sat over the SLK chassis for the very first time. I tell you what, for a starter for 10, that is not too bad. As first test fits go, it really couldn't have gone any better. You know, the body fitted over the chassis and it sits where I thought it would sit. I have roughly squared and manoeuvred the body round, so it's now in its rough location, although not millimetre perfect as you'd expect. What I do need to really sort of get my head around and understand is, as the body sat and rested on the chassis, it did sort of relax into place. So I'm going to need to look very carefully at the doors and the bonnet and the boot lid just to see how they now fit, because there is, as you'd expect, some twist and movement to the body. If I lift it up at the back slightly, it sort of tapers in the flanks of the underside of the belly pan. So there's lots of little pieces that I want to understand the impact of actually having the body now sat on the chassis. But that'll all come in time as I start getting my head around this metal structure that I need to fabricate to really properly support this body. Right, let's jump in here because we may as well get down to the brass tacks of what this support structure is. I've certainly mentioned it in pretty much every video, and it'll be good to share with you guys what I'm actually trying to do and what the purpose of it is. So I've sort of pieced together a few photos to give you an impression of what others have done before me. Now, these range from a very, very simplistic hollow tube sort of skeleton. It acts almost like a coat hanger. You know, this frame would weld and mount to the chassis, and then the body would literally sit over this framework to then be supported and fixed either with fiberglass or panel bond or however the builder saw fit. This isn't anywhere near as robust as I'll be going. So let's move on to the next photo, and you can see here that this starts to look more like a, well, I don't want to say structural, because if you really dig into the photo detail of the actual build of this frame, I will certainly be trying to shoot for something with a more higher quality finish. But hey, you know, everyone builds to their own standards, so let's live and let live. But you can see here, there's the sill level framework to support the body from that aspect. There is also some main sort of rollover hoops there before you start to then look around the back side of the car, and you can see where the skeleton, you know, that structure then picks up the back of the body as it wraps around the back end. So this is sort of moving more in the direction that I'll be going, but again, it's not quite hitting the mark. Next photo is more of the same, but it's getting much closer. The A and B hoops you can see there look to be made out of possibly 38mm CDS, something of that nature. The sill bracing, generally this is done very similarly throughout all of the builds that I've seen. But again, I'm going to try and look at fine-tuning that, elevating it slightly, but you know, I won't make too many promises until I actually start. But this is very much functional in terms of trying to get some structural rigidity back into the shell with those rollover hoops, and certainly the cross bracing from side to side. Now, a couple of photos that I did stumble across are actually going way above and beyond what I'll be doing. It really is like a full skeleton support structure. The entire body has been cut away on this particular SLK, and you can see the intricate framework that will be underneath that body. Now, I don't plan to go to this level, but certainly taking some of the cues of how it drops down to the lower level of the new boot floor, I do really like. This particular car is a roadster, so there are no rollover hoops, but you can imagine this sort of structural design then tied in to a 38mm CDS, at least A and B pillars with a spine running down the center connecting those two together. You can hopefully start to see where I'll be coming from in terms of the framework that I'm looking to make on my build. So before the test fit of the body, there was a couple of bits that I needed to remove or get out the way in the engine bay. The first one was the radiator expansion tank. The second one was to unbolt the ABS manifold and remove the little rubber mounts and push that down lower into the engine bay by about 10mm or so. The next was take the ECU and the wiring loom out of its chunky plastic box and basically just leave it loose in the engine bay for the time being. But that just buys you more space for the body to sit down lower. So, first things first, at the front here, the body is sat on the rain tray and the front scuttle. You'll see that it currently sits down lower than the radiator. So I know some people have lowered the radiator, which then makes it visible from the underside of the front valance. So neither of those, well, that idea doesn't really sit particularly nicely with me. So what I may consider is going for aftermarket radiators. I'm going to look at the size of the one that I used in the GT40 because I know that was deeper and I can accommodate the depth of that in the engine bay, and it was quite a lot shorter in height. And I know there is a very similar sized AC condenser, so I think I could put together a new rad pack to work better in this height confined space that I've now got in front of me. A massive one is the fact that the intake on the engine is now above the line of where the bonnet would sit. So whether the body does actually need to be this low, I'm going to investigate in this video, and I'm going to fit the air suspension that I've already got for the car, because if I can get the car to a aired out height that I'm happy with, I can actually look at raising the body slightly. You know, if this body doesn't need to be this low, then absolutely perfect, I won't make it this low. Likewise, if it needs to be lower, then I will continue to cut things around and even look at changing the engine mounts. I've had a look underneath, and these engine mounts are probably 60 or 70 mil high. So I'm sure I could find a thinner engine mount that would allow me to drop the engine down to give me the necessary clearance for the bonnet structure. Likewise, the brake reservoir bottle sticks above the line of the bonnet, so that would need to be sorted out and looked into to see what I can do with that. Now, there are evil thoughts in my head about trying to shave this engine bay. Now, anyone that's into any sort of custom car scene at the moment will be aware of that term. You know, it's where you remove everything that isn't necessary, or the things that still are necessary are moved out of sight. And I'm looking at the ABS module. You know, I could remove that and fit a pedal box. I could do away with the brake servo at the same time by using that pedal box with the correctly sized master cylinders. It's something that I'd done on a very, very old project car, and obviously it's something that I'm familiar with when I built the GT40. So that would clear up a whole chunk of space in that engine bay. I could pull through the wiring harness into the cabin, get that all cleaned up and tucked away underneath the dashboard. And then that will just leave a few other little ancillaries that could be tucked in the inner wings out of sight. But I'm trying not to think about that too much at this stage, because there are bigger things to worry about. And those are the things that I've just sort of covered to you. So that's the front. Let's take a little wander down the side. As you can see, the side profile of the car looks fairly goofy at the moment, with the standard suspension still fitted and the SLK wheels on here. But what it does do is start to give me a good understanding of what I'm working with. I think there's an element of optical illusion to this one. There is only a 1 centimetre difference in wheel arch gap from front to rear. And there is also the correct rake from back to front. So I think with the body, like I say, in pretty much a reasonable position at the moment for this initial sort of fact-finding mission, I can now look at wheel offsets and wheel widths and things of that nature, because I'm keen to get the actual wheels that I want to run on order, so I can then really fine-tune the fitment as I'm still mucking around with the body. Now, those of you that followed me on the GT40 build will know I basically built the entire car around the wheels. You know, I custom fabricated the rear arches to fit the offsets of those wheels absolutely perfectly. And that's the sort of level that I want to go to with this. I don't want to have a wheel that just fits. I want a wheel that looks absolutely perfect and gives me the overall vision that I've got in my mind's eye. Coming around to the back of the car, you can see how much higher the existing SLK chassis rails sit above the Gullwing body. But now you can sort of start to see something I touched on in a previous video, where I mentioned about making the drop floor where the new custom fuel tank and battery and fuel little ancillaries are going to hide away. So I'm looking forward to getting my head around and starting to make a plan for the rear sort of crash bar, the rear hoop that will run around the back of the body and then tie into the existing SLK chassis, along with making that drop boot floor, getting the exhaust run through and everything else that is in this space. I know I've mentioned the frame structure to support the body, but one thing I am going to be doing is actually making a roll cage out of 38mm CDS. Now, my plan is to build a main B-pillar hoop that runs obviously all the way up and over the roof space. That will have a spine piece that runs along the top of the roof that the Gullwing hinges will pick up on some custom brackets. And then I'll be forming an A-pillar hoop also. All of this will be tied into the SLK chassis and into any of the new framework that I do build. But it's quite important to me to try and tie back in some of the structural rigidity back into this car from where the rear bulk head has been cut out and things of that nature. I've mentioned by now that the very first step I want to do is get this car sat on its air suspension in its laid out state, so I can really understand if I need to do any more cutting to the chassis of the SLK to get this body sitting where I need it to. So I've dug out from the loft space some bits that I've had sat on for a couple of months now, and they are the air suspension. So I've got the bags and the struts here, they're made by a company called AirTech Engineering in the USA, and this kit is actually made for a Chrysler Crossfire. Now, I'm sure there are a few of you out there that do know this fact, but the Chrysler Crossfire and the R170 SLK are 99.9% the same car. Other than the external skin, they are the same underneath. And by the looks of it, it will give me the drop that I do need. But if it doesn't, I'm more than prepared to start cutting around spring seats and all sorts to get that aired out height absolutely perfect. So this is a rear bag. It's a universal rear bag, and then it uses the custom necessary mounting hats for either end. So that was the rear. Here on the front, there's a bit more machining work that have gone into those, but they look lovely. You know, they look like they will be fit for purpose. And then also supplied are the dampers. They are adjustable for damping, so I can fine tune the ride as and when the car is finally out on the road. And likewise, the threaded body will allow me to move that in and out of the body sleeve to then get the desired amount of travel necessary on the damper. So it's a fantastic kit, and I'm looking forward to getting this installed. So less talking, let's break out some spanners and get this kit fitted to the car. So this isn't an SLK how-to kind of channel, it's more of a bad financial decision kind of place. So I won't bore you with removing all of the existing springs and dampers. Got those out the way as quick as possible before muscling into place the new airbags. I didn't worry about running any air lines or installing the dampers because that's not the purpose of this installation. It's purely just to get the car sat at its aired out height. Once that was done, quickly ran around, bolting on the wheels so I could get this thing lowered to the ground. Something I did want to touch on that has been raised quite a lot in the comments, and I understand, don't get me wrong, but there has been a certain amount of negativity in relation to the choice of donor car. Now, for those of you that don't know, the donor car used for these SL recreations is a R170 Mercedes SLK. Now, I want to try and build the best of the best, so for me, the perfect donor car was the AMG 32. Now, I could have gone for a lesser model, you know, the 200 compressor, the 230 compressor. If I'm honest, I don't know all of the model designations. I'm not a Mercedes man. So for me, I'm not adverse to chopping anything up, but I don't care that this is a rare car. You know, this is the basis for me building my next dream car. So for those of you that out there that have given me some stick, fair play to you. But if you have a 32 AMG and you are keeping it in pristine condition, then I'm doing you a favour by chopping up another one, getting one off of the road, because that only increases the value of your standard perfect pristine car. And if that is your baby and you love the SLKs and everything that goes along with that mark, then good on you. But for me personally, this is just a means to an end. I wanted to buy the very best car to form the very best basis for this build. And that's a reason, and another point that has been raised is, why didn't I buy a scrapped car? Why didn't I buy an insurance write-off car? And again, it falls back to my previous explanation. I wanted to start with the very best car that I could possibly find. I didn't want a scrap car. I didn't want an old, rusted, beaten up insurance written off car, because that comes with history and stigma associated with that. So a clean base that needs next to no rust repair or anything of that nature just allows me to get off to the very best start with this build as possible. So I'm sure you can understand where I'm coming from, as I can with you. You know, we're all in this together in a bizarre sort of sounding way. So yeah, you can give me some stick. I really don't mind. I'm sorry if it's rubbed you up the wrong way, but I don't care. So I think we've covered that off. Should we get on with the episode? After figuring out the necessary blocks of wood under what wheels to get the jack out from underneath the car, now it sits that much lower, and almost rolling the car into the front wall of the garage, I was finally able to get all of those blocks of wood out from underneath and then stand back to see how this thing looks. As a starting point, I'm really happy with how the car's sat. However, I've already spaced up the back of the shell by about 25mm. You could see there that there's a couple of timber packers just sat on the inner arch. Now, the reason I did do that was because as soon as the car was down on its wheels on the ground, I noticed that there was a huge amount of reverse rake to the body shell. And what that basically means is the line of the sill wasn't parallel to the line of the ground. There was less of a gap at the back than there was at the front of the sill. So by bringing the back of the body up, I increased the distance and have therefore made that line parallel to the ground, which was very critical for me and how I want the car to look in its aired out state. There is something else that I want to look into to further try and improve the stance of the car, is the distance from the wheel to arch gap. You can see here on the back that it's minimal, it's 10 or 15 mil, whereas compared to the front, there is probably another 10 or 15 mil difference in height. So it's not of massive critical importance to me, but it's something I want to investigate just to see if it can be improved. And I'm going to do that by removing the front airbags again and then lowering the car down just to see if there is any more suspension articulation available to me. And if there is, whatever that increase in drop may be, I'm then going to raise the height of the top spring perch or the top airbag mount as it now is, to then allow me to drop the chassis further still, which will then reduce that wheel to arch gap and start to make it even with the back. So I'm quite excited for that actually, because it's not something I've seen anyone do before. So it's me just trying to chase that perfect stance of when the car is parked up at its aired out height. Once I've investigated all of that, I can then really start to fine tune the position of the body, taking into account all of the issues that I still need to work around in the engine bay, start to get this thing, locked down to millimetre accuracy before I then start the framework construction. So I think that draws us to a natural conclusion on this one. It certainly felt like another bumper episode, certainly a huge milestone to get the body over the chassis, the airbags fitted and the car sat on the ground for the very first time. It really starts to help me visualise how this car is shaping up. Now in the next episode, I'll be finalising the position of the body and then starting to really dig into the detail about the support structure that's necessary and how it's all going to tie into the SLK chassis. So up until that next episode, I'll catch you next time.